Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a story that feels, I don't know, less like corporate history and more like an existential threat straight out of a sci-fi novel.
It really does.
We're witnessing the absolute collision of human behavioral science, willpower, accountability, community with pure disruptive chemistry.
Hmm.
We are, of course, talking about WeightWatchers International, a 60-year-old brand built on, church basement meetings and a proprietary point system.
And now it's staring down the barrel of a drug-fueled revolution in weight management.
That's a perfect framing.
The arrival of GLP-1 receptor agonists, drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and all their coming competitors, it didn't just introduce a new product. It fundamentally challenged the philosophical basis of every diet company ever built on this idea of personal willpower and effort.
So for you, the listener, the central dilemma here is just massive. It's existential.
Sure.
Can a global brand rooted in the weekly meeting and the scale actually survive?
Survive when the fundamental challenge of weight loss can, at least theoretically, be completely outsourced to a molecule.
Yeah. And this is where that financial pressure turns into an absolute catastrophe. The sources we've analyzed detail a full-blown crisis at WW International or just WW.
Yeah, the core problem, and you can see it laid bare in the balance sheets, is that WW filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
On May 6, 2025. And this wasn't some minor corporate shuffle. This was a desperate, massive restructuring.
A huge effort aimed at shedding an astonishing amount of excess debt. Specifically, they targeted $1.15 billion of debt.
$1.15 billion.
We have to stop and unpack what Chapter 11 even means in this context. It's not liquidation, right? It's a reorganization.
Right. It's designed to keep the company running.
Exactly, while it legally addresses its overwhelming debt. But that debt load, that $1.15 billion, that's the crushing context for every single strategic decision we're going to talk about.
And the market's reaction just shows how fragile the company was.
Oh, completely.
The financial consequences were immediate, they were severe, and they were rapid. It highlights the market's swift judgment that their traditional model was just obsolete. As of May 2025, WW was considered a penny stock. It closed at a fraction of its former value, just 24 cents per share on May 15th.
24 cents.
And the very next day, May 16th, the company was delisted from the NASDAQ, forced to trade on the over-the-counter markets.
Wow. When you see a legacy brand collapse that quickly, a fundamental tectonic shift has occurred.
It absolutely does. And it just underscores the failure of their old business model. It couldn't generate the cash to service that debt.
But the truly fascinating, almost defiant part of this story is the radical turnaround attempt. And that was led by the former CEO, Sima Sistani.
She stepped into the role in March 2022, facing this looming debt crisis and the early threat of the GLP-1s.
And she executed a pivot that, it required incredible nerve.
It really did. By early 2023, she made the move. WW acquired the telehealth weight loss platform Sequence.
That acquisition was announced on March 7, 2023, and it closed just the next month. This wasn't just like integrating a new product line.
Oh, this was a complete identity shift.
It was the company's defiant answer to the chemical revolution. The acquisition of Sequence meant WW could now offer consultations with doctors and prescribe the very same GLP-1 drugs.
Ozempic, Wegovy.
Mounjaro, all of them. The same drugs that were threatening its core existence.
So they essentially decided, if you can't beat the future, you have to buy the future.
And sell the product that is rendering your past irrelevant. Sistani herself called this a bet-the-company maneuver.
That's an understatement.
It is, considering they were already carrying massive debt, and now they're taking on more risk to redefine themselves as a provider of clinical solutions, moving away from just being about community and points.
So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack this extraordinary collision. We're going to trace the history of WeightWatchers, the original magic of the church basement. We'll analyze the economic shockwave caused by the GLP-1 revolution. And finally, we'll examine the high-stakes, deeply personal turnaround attempt that cost Sima Sistani her job, even as she arguably steered the company away from total extinction.
It's a fascinating story.
Let's start at the very beginning, the genesis of this community model in the 1960s, because the success of WeightWatchers was really rooted in its humble, relatable origin story.
It really was. The founder was Jean Needich, a housewife living in Queens, New York. And it's so important to remember she wasn't some corporate executive or fitness guru.
Right.
She was just someone struggling with compulsive eating. The sources have this incredible, visceral detail from her obituary. She confessed to hiding Malamars in her laundry hamper
Hamper?
and binging on them alone in the bathroom at night. That level of shame and secrecy, that's what defined the experience for millions of people before WW existed.
And that personal pain became the spark for a global enterprise. Needetch tried everything, right? Fad diets, diet pills, even hypnosis.
And nothing stuck.
Nothing. It was only when she started meeting with a group of friends, other overweight people, in a basement in New York, sharing their struggles, sharing tips, providing mutual support, that she found success.
And she lost 72 pounds. But, crucially, she maintained her goal weight of 150 pounds for the rest of her life.
The winning formula was so simple, yet it was revolutionary for the time. Shared struggle equals shared success.
Yeah, it formalized the idea that weight management was psychological and social, not just physiological. So she formally launched WeightWatchers in May 1963.
They rented space in community centers, public buildings, and charged members a modest $2 a week to attend the meetings.
$2. And 400 people showed up to the very first official meeting.
400.
It just shows the immediate unmet need for this type of service.
The model franchised so rapidly because it worked. I mean, within 4 years, they had over 100 franchises across the U.S. and internationally.
And by January 1968, so less than 5 years after launch, the company had already hit 1 million members across 5 countries.
It was an unstoppable rise, built entirely on community accountability and that weekly weigh-in.
And of course, that success attracted corporate attention. In 1978, Heinz acquired WeightWatchers for $71.2 million.
Right.
By the 1990s, the weight loss industry was valued at an immense $32 billion, and WeightWatchers was the undisputed market leader.
And they were generating $300 million in annual sales. But they had to keep innovating to stay ahead of rivals like Jenny Craig and SlimFast.
Their major innovation was the famous points system.
Yes.
It was designed to differentiate them from simple calorie counting. The algorithm quantified food based on its nutritional profile, carbs, fat, fiber.
The idea was to create this finite resource, right? Your daily points budget. And you had to spend it wisely, guiding you toward healthier, more filling foods without demanding you count every single calorie.
It was behavioral psychology translated into a consumable product. And they were smart about evolving it, went digital early, launching their first website in 2003. Then in 2010, the point system saw a major overhaul. And this is a critical strategic move that people often overlook.
What was it?
They assigned fruits and vegetables 0 points.
Oh, right.
And why is this important? Because it strategically encouraged unlimited consumption of healthy foods. It shifted the psychological focus from restriction to abundance within that framework of accountability.
That's a great point. And this constant evolution kept them relevant for decades, always centered on managed intake coupled with community.
Exactly.
But perhaps the biggest corporate strategic play in recent memory was the Oprah factor. That began in 2015.
Indeed. No analysis of modern WW is complete without Oprah Winfrey. Her involvement began formally in October 2015.
And it was a huge deal.
It was a strategic collaboration. Critically, she made a substantial equity investment, buying a significant stake, and she joined the board of directors.
So her presence and endorsement were immediately seen as a potential savior for the brand, which was already showing some early signs of stagnation.
It's important to acknowledge, as our sources do, that Oprah's own weight management journey was famously public and complex.
Oh, very public. The New York Times called it her ever-expanding and contracting waistline years before her WW partnership.
Exactly. She had publicly struggled with restrictive diets, even products like OptiFast. Her struggle was the American struggle with weight management, just writ large and televised.
So her investment in WW was huge because it lent the brand instant visibility, credibility, and maybe most importantly, a sense of shared humanity.
Absolutely. She remained a director through at least May 2025 and was restricted from endorsing any other weight loss programs. It signaled a deep, long-term commitment. This was meant to be the inflection point that stabilized the brand.
And yet, despite this powerful celebrity endorsement and strategic commitment, the underlying financial structure began to crack dramatically, well before Ozempic became a household name.
Yeah, that traditional community-led, effort-driven, belief-based model was really struggling against macroeconomic pressures and shifting consumer preferences.
The financial picture leading up to the 2025 Chapter 11 filing, it just paints a picture of a company built on a liability that was waiting for a trigger.
It really does. Let's look at the data from 2022. They reported a full-year operating loss of $283 million.
And what does an operating loss mean for the listener?
It means the core business, the meetings, the point system, the digital subscriptions, it wasn't generating enough money to cover its normal day-to-day costs. The business, at its core, was hemorrhaging money.
And crucially, contained within that loss was a massive non-cash charge. $396.7 million in non-cash intangible impairment charges.
Okay, that's a complex financial term. Let's break that down.
Please.
In plain language, intangible impairment charges means the company had to legally and publicly admit that the value of its non-physical assets, so franchise rights they'd acquired, and the general brand goodwill,
The brand's name.
the name itself, they had to admit it was functionally worth hundreds of millions of dollars less than what was on the balance sheet. They were writing down the value of the WeightWatchers brand.
That's a stark admission of brand devaluation.
It is.
And this loss of faith in the brand's future value combined disastrously with a staggering debt load. As of the end of 2022, their total debt was nearly $1.5 billion.
$1.445 billion. And here's the key financial vulnerability. $945 million of that debt consisted of variable rate instruments.
This is the insight that shows just how fragile the company was.
Exactly. Variable rate debt means the interest rate they pay fluctuates with the market. When global interest rates began climbing rapidly in the early 2020s, that debt suddenly became exponentially more expensive to service.
So the company was structurally incapable of absorbing a shock.
It was. The GLP-1 revolution wasn't the sole cause of the bankruptcy. It was the accelerant. It exposed a pre-existing financial fragility and an outmoded business model that was already failing.
And speaking of failing, membership was declining sharply. They had 3.5 million members at the end of 2022. Sign-ups continued to drop year over year in 2023.
So you have mounting debt, soaring interest expenses, a massive impairment of the brand's value, and a shrinking customer base.
The Chapter 11 filing in 2025, it wasn't just inevitable, it was a strategically delayed necessity to restructure that crippling debt. That trajectory brings us squarely to the age of Ozempic. We've traced the incredible rise of the church basement model, but that 60-year success story hits a wall. And that wall is made of chemistry.
It really is.
Let's shift now to the moment the pharmaceutical world sent a shockwave through the entire concept of diet.
This transition from behavioral effort to clinical management is the central narrative shift of our time. The rise of semaglutide, the active ingredient in drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, it fundamentally changed the narrative around weight loss.
From a moral failing
to a solvable physiological problem.
And the visibility was just immediate and overwhelming. Celebrities weren't just endorsing a diet plan, they were posting selfies showcasing visibly slimmer frames, often attributed to these drugs.
The cultural footprint was immense, leveraging modern media platforms. The hashtag Ozempic challenge, for example, it trended across TikTok, amassing over 250 million views.
You couldn't ignore it.
Impossible. The demand was so overwhelming that it caused significant shortages of Ozempic, which was originally approved for type 2 diabetes.
Right.
This prompted Novo Nordisk to strategically introduce Wegovy in 2021, which received specific FDA approval for chronic weight management in adults with obesity.
And that distinction is crucial.
It is. It officially formalized GLP-1 drugs as a clinical medical solution for obesity, moving them out of the realm of, off-label use and into the mainstream treatment paradigm.
So let's briefly explain what GLP-1 receptor agonists are, because the term is complex, but the mechanism is surprisingly elegant.
Well, they're hormones that mimic a natural hormone called glucagon-like peptide 1, which is released in your gut after you eat.
Okay.
And essentially, these drugs perform three key functions at the same time. First, they dramatically slow down gastric emptying so you feel fuller for longer.
Got it.
Second, they act on the satiety centers in the brain, reducing food noise and suppressing appetite. And third, they help regulate insulin and blood sugar.
So they don't just change your diet, they change the chemistry of your hunger.
Exactly. The craving, the constant food noise, it's chemically quieted.
And this is precisely the scientific basis that Sima Sistani leaned on to justify her radical pivot. She openly acknowledged that the science had evolved to show that living with obesity is a chronic condition.
And her key quote, that it is not willpower alone, was a full-throated rejection of the very philosophical foundation upon which WeightWatchers was built.
That statement was seismic.
It was. For 60 years, the underlying institutional message of WW was that if you followed the system and exerted effort, you would succeed.
And therefore, if you failed, it must be a failure of your willpower.
Your effort. Sistani reversed that. She validated the lived experience of millions by saying, your struggle is biological and metabolic, not a moral failing.
That was essential for the company to move forward.
It had to happen.
And that shift in medical and cultural understanding correlates directly to changing consumer behavior. Consumers were already moving away from the strictures of diet culture.
Yeah, the rise of body positivity and health at every size movements had already made the punitive, community-enforced dieting model less culturally palatable.
And people simply prefer clinical solutions that are faster, require less personal sacrifice, and demand less long-term commitment than the old effort-driven paradigm.
We see a marked consumer preference for measurable, predictable medical interventions, whether that's prescription meds like GLP-1s or even bariatric surgery.
The effort-to-reward ratio dramatically favors the chemical solution.
It does. And this preference for clinical efficacy over emotional support, at least initially, was compounded by the accessibility factor.
The delivery mechanism was equally disruptive. Telehealth.
Telehealth platforms just exploded in popularity. They offered convenient virtual access to doctors who could swiftly prescribe these drugs.
So why would a younger, busy consumer sit in a church basement meeting for 45 minutes every week for accountability?
When they can get a prescription and medical oversight via a virtual platform on their lunch break, this immediate, convenient accessibility completely disrupted WW's decades-old physical meeting model.
This confluence of factors creates the profound brand dilemma. WW was rigid, stuck in the past, despite its singular mission. They tried to shift in 2018, rebranding to just WW to focus on overall health and wellness, but the cultural baggage was too heavy.
Weight loss was still the major focus, and the culture had just moved on. They were trying to look progressive while being tied to an antiquated core offering.
And WW's crisis reflects a much wider dilemma for trusted legacy brands. The moment the essential delivery mechanism changes, that brand quickly faces obsolescence.
Especially if it's burdened with debt. The sources gave some great examples to illustrate this.
Yeah, like Peloton losing its mission clarity post-pandemic when gyms reopened.
Right, or Revlon, a cosmetics giant, ignoring the rising demand for inclusion and authenticity that newer brands embraced.
Or J.Crew suffering from fashion whiplash, unable to adapt their preppy, classic aesthetic to shifting trends.
What unites all these examples is that the core mechanism that built their dominance, physical meetings, legacy glamour standards, a specific aesthetic, it was replaced by something faster, more flexible, or more culturally aligned.
For WeightWatchers, the reliance on calorie-counting booklets, group weigh-ins, and that moralizing language of effort suddenly felt utterly outdated.
Completely outdated when compared to the pharmacological assistance offered by semaglutide.
That analysis perfectly sets the stage for Sima Sistani's high-stakes pivot. She was the leader who realized that the company couldn't survive unless it embraced the very disruption that was killing it.
Her background is so vital to understanding her risk tolerance and her drive. She is first-generation Persian, grew up in Alabama, and she attributes her innate hustle to the sacrifices made by her immigrant parents.
She shared this really moving detail.
Yeah.
Her mother earned her PhD on the same day Sistani graduated from Duke, and her mom had learned English by watching Sesame Street with her daughter.
That sets a high bar for ambition and problem-solving, doesn't it?
It really does. And her career trajectory is highly nonlinear, moving her from finance to tech leadership. She started with a sociology degree from Duke, worked on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs,
A notoriously high-pressure environment.
and then co-founded House Party, a face-to-face social network that sold to Epic Games in 2019.
So this blend of Wall Street discipline and tech disruption, it prepared her perfectly for the monumental challenge of turning around a debt-laden 60-year-old legacy brand.
She joined WW as CEO in March 2022.
And Sistani herself is quoted as saying she loves solving problems across different stages of business, large companies, startups, turnarounds.
She approached the WW challenge with deep conviction, partly because of her own personal connection.
Right. She had previously lost 60 pounds on WeightWatchers postpartum, but years later, she discovered she had an underlying thyroid and metabolic issue.
What she felt gave her a unique firsthand understanding that weight management is incredibly complex, it's often metabolic, and not just about dieting discipline.
And this informed her strategic imperative, the acquisition of sequence. This was not a modest integration. This was the bet the company sort of move we mentioned earlier.
She believed this shift was the only future, and it was a necessary step to fundamentally change WW's toxic association with diet culture.
And let's just pause here to address the strategic recklessness implicit in that move.
Yeah.
The company was drowning in $1.4 billion of high-interest debt. The market was already questioning their viability. How did the leadership justify spending more money to acquire a telehealth platform?
Well, it was strategically non-negotiable. They saw Jenny Craig, a direct competitor, folding under the pressure. Sistani realized that if they didn't become a clinical provider immediately, they would die.
So the debt was a constraint, but the disruption was an extinction event.
Exactly. By acquiring Sequence, they were not just buying a technology platform, they were buying a clinical pathway, a means of survival.
Her goal was clear: to offer options and choices for people to live metabolically healthy and proactively resolve the stigma the brand had inadvertently brought mainstream.
She explicitly mentioned reading messages suggesting the brand was run by the patriarchy to shrink women. She was determined to reject that interpretation.
And shift the purpose toward health and individual choice, including medical choice.
This transformation required a highly public acknowledgement of the company's past shortcomings, which Sistani consciously started what was publicly dubbed the apology tour.
She felt that WW, as a large institutional brand, had unintentionally helped form structural stigma and internalized shame around weight for decades.
And she wanted to be the first out there to say, this is what we got wrong, this is what we're doing about it.
It was an act of corporate humility designed to earn back cultural capital.
That approach generated significant flack. It was criticized as being calculated or insincere. Yet Sistani was adamant. She said she felt proud because she could wake up and look at myself in the mirror.
And pragmatically, the move was arguably vindicated when you look at their competitor. Jenny Craig went bankrupt during the exact same period that WW made this pivotal move.
Adaptation over extinction.
Exactly. But the path was fraught with difficulty, particularly regarding engaging with long-standing critics within the body, positivity, and anti-diet movements.
This brings us to the Katie Steno incident.
Right. Katie Steno, a respected body advocate and entrepreneur whom Sistani respected and followed, publicly criticized the CEO for not using the specific necessary words.
Which were?
I'm sorry.
This is a remarkable example of leadership acknowledging public critique in real time. Sistani reflected on the feedback and realized she hadn't used those exact words.
So following a consultation with Oprah Winfrey, they organized a major, very public event, a 3-hour live special about making the shift.
And they brought Steno on to have that difficult conversation live, right in the company's main spotlight.
And that went beyond just public relations. The sources note that Sistani later funded a podcast for Steno.
Wow.
It demonstrated a genuine commitment not just to listen, but to incorporate and empower critical voices into their new framework.
It signaled a fundamental cultural shift within WW, attempting to transition from being the source of diet shame to a champion of holistic health and self-acceptance.
Yeah, the revised mission became profoundly deeper than just measuring weight loss. It focused on self-esteem and confidence.
The core understanding shifted. Striving for an externally defined ideal will never lead to happiness if the internal view of the self is broken.
They were aiming to help people appreciate themselves internally, regardless of the physical outcome, using clinical tools if necessary, but providing the support regardless.
The story of Sistani at WW, however, is not just about corporate strategy. It's a modern case study in the immense personal price of high-profile public leadership.
Especially as a woman driving a controversial turnaround.
Right. The scrutiny she faced was unrelenting. As a publicly traded CEO, her compensation, roughly $8.8 million in 2023, was publicly disclosed.
A financial transparency that she found inherently uncomfortable, especially coming from the comparative secrecy of the private startup world.
But the loss of privacy and the forced suppression of her own personality seemed to weigh even more heavily. She described being so fearful of public scrutiny that she asked a friend to take down a video of her simply dancing at the pool during a private women's retreat.
Just dancing.
She worried that a video of her having fun would create a bad vibe or an unseemly image, given the intense activism and scrutiny surrounding the brand's pivot.
She felt compelled to put my personality away a bit and just be this one thing, the disciplined, non-controversial executive.
That is the tremendous cost of modern leadership. You surrender your personal freedom to the corporate narrative, especially when you are trying to shed decades of negative brand history.
And she credits her support system with enabling her to endure that constant scrutiny and execute the pivot. Her husband, who worked in growth capital, was her acknowledged harbor.
He provided crucial financial stability during her earlier startup years, allowing her to rely on his paycheck.
And later took on an all-in parent role when she took the highly demanding WW CEO job, compensating for her frequent travel.
It's a classic contradiction we see with high achievers, right? He initially resisted her taking the job because it meant returning to the constant travel and zero privacy after she had left Epic Games.
They were supposed to be settling into a quieter life in North Carolina. But once she committed to the mission, recognizing its importance, he became fully supportive. He recognized her drive was essential to her identity.
Ultimately, despite executing the pivot that embraced the GLP-1 direction and arguably securing the company's future clinical path, Sistani stepped down from the CEO role.
And she described the initial feeling of stepping off the hamster wheel as terrible, despite this strategic victory.
The media headlines, often simplified to WW CEO embraced Omic, now she's out of the company, probably didn't help that immediate feeling of failure or rejection.
I'm sure it didn't. She recognized that her ego and identity had become completely wrapped up in the mission. She had invested so much of herself in that necessary, controversial pivot.
It required conscious, diligent effort to pull her identity back and separate it from the executive role. The process took time.
Moving from feeling not good until it felt great. That suggests a period of intense, necessary self-reflection to redefine success outside of the corporate title.
She now describes her current season as one of profound freedom, a state she achieved by establishing financial security through her decades of high-level work.
And her new goal isn't corporate power. It's to live a liberated life.
Prioritizing her own schedule and focusing on energy versus outcomes and alignment versus ambition.
Her philosophy of work and balance is fascinating and, I think, incredibly useful for any high-achieving listener. She calls the word balance dangerous and impossible.
Well, like dangerous.
Because it falsely implies an unrealistic 50-50 split between life and work. And that chase for 50-50 equilibrium is often what leads to burnout and guilt.
So instead, she champions the 100% rule, which focuses on presence.
Right. Give 100% of your presence and energy to the thing you are currently working on. If you are running a critical town hall meeting, be 100% focused on that.
And when you shift gears for family time, a workout, or a dedicated exercise block, be 100% present in that zone, minimize distraction, and maximize the quality of engagement.
She advises those currently in the thick of their careers to assume they love their work, go after it with gusto, but crucially, use reflection, the data from the past, to calibrate when their goals and priorities inevitably shift.
Her decision not to return to a CEO role for at least 5 years, prioritizing the ability to stay in North Carolina and travel on her own terms, perfectly encapsulates that shift.
It's a powerful lesson in knowing when to step off the wheel once the financial goals are met. It's moving toward alignment over sheer ambition.
This entire saga of WeightWatchers is a potent microcosm of the disruptive age we live in. It illustrates how technological change can overturn even the most entrenched legacy brands.
It really does.
Let's review the key takeaways for you, the learner, integrating the corporate and the personal narratives.
First, we analyze the profound historical inertia of a 60-year-old brand trying desperately to shed the stigma of diet culture while facing a truly radical technological challenge, the GLP-1 drugs.
The brand was built on behavioral effort, and science just found a shortcut, rendering the original offering obsolete.
Second, we saw the very real and rapid financial consequence of brand misalignment coupled with structural weakness.
The traditional model was already struggling under a massive load of variable rate debt. The GLP-1 disruption was the shockwave that resulted in the Chapter 11 filing, the stock delisting.
And it forced the necessary strategic adaptation of acquiring Sequence to enter the telehealth and prescription market. The acquisition was a high-risk gamble, but it was purely a measure of corporate survival.
And finally, we highlighted the intangible challenges of modern corporate leadership through Sima Sistani's experience.
Navigating intense public identity, financial scrutiny, and the delicate process of pivoting the culture of a legacy brand toward a controversial but scientifically effective new solution.
She had the courage to address the structural shame that the institution itself had inadvertently created.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you, the person trying to navigate their own health in this new landscape?
Well, the massive cultural and corporate shift that WW was forced to make, It confirms a profound cultural and medical recognition that personal health journeys, particularly related to weight, are increasingly being recognized as metabolic and chronic conditions, rather than simply a failure of personal willpower or effort.
That validation is perhaps the most important takeaway of this entire story.
I think so too. And this raises a critical choice for consumers and for the future of companies like WW. If medically assisted weight management is now accessible via convenient telehealth platforms,
WW's new model with Sequence.
right? What is the intrinsic, irreplaceable value of the original community-based support system? The $2 weekly church basement meeting was the genesis and legacy of the brand.
So if the chemical solution addresses the physical mechanics of weight loss suppressing appetite, quieting food noise, and the corporate entity is focused on debt restructuring and clinical delivery, where will the necessary community and emotional support reside?
That's the question. The profound mental and social changes that come with rapid or medically assisted weight loss, the social dynamics, the body image shifts, the long-term maintenance, they still require human connection.
Emotional processing and non-judgmental accountability.
That original WW community model may, paradoxically, be more necessary now than ever before, but maybe less about dieting and more about navigating the societal and psychological complexity of living in a changing body and managing a chronic condition long term.
So if the science handles the body, the community must handle the mind.
That remains the essential question facing Weight Watchers survival. Can they prove that the intangible value of support is worth paying for, even when the point system is irrelevant?